Hi everyone, and welcome to Therapy Unfiltered. I'm Joe Valder, clinical counselor here, counseling services at Johnson & Wales University. On this show, we take the mystery out of mental health and help you understand what it's really like to sit on the couch. It's time to take a deep breath and dive in. As you may recall from last time of our very exciting two-part episode, we're just doing like an introduction of counseling services, talking about what we offer, how to access us, and basically how we can be helpful. And just like last time, I'm very excited and privileged to say that we have returning Stephanie Dixon, the Director of Counseling Services at Johnson & Wales, and we're just going to continue our conversation. And I thought a good place to start, actually, and I didn't mention this to Stephanie before, so it could be a surprise, is just a brief mention of self-care, because we talk about how important that is and how we all should be engaging in self-care. And I wanted to talk about a little bit of what I do for self-care. And this might not be too unusual here at this university, but I love cooking. I love to cook. I love food. I especially love cooking outside. And so it's something I try to do every day, because I also eat every day. So coincidentally, I might be cooking too. It just makes me happy. I enjoy it. Not exactly sure why, but I think it's fun. And actually, I also enjoy just the process of cleaning up afterwards, as strange as that might sound. I enjoy that part too. So I'm very protective of dinner time. I always try to make time for it. I always try to make sure I'm free during that time because I think we all should be protective of our self-care. So what about for you, Stephanie? What's your self-care?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me back. I appreciate the second invite. And this is a very cool endeavor for us here in counseling. So thank you again, Joe, for taking this on and making this happen for our team. So self-care is definitely, I think it's important for all of us, whether, you're a mental health professional or no matter what you do, just as humans. We get very used to taking care of other people and, having so many tasks that we have to get done on a day-to-day basis, and whether that's related to academics or other things going on in our lives. But it's important to not lose sight of ourselves and how we're doing, and even I'll be pretty transparent with folks. I think I struggle with self-care sometimes, which I think is common, and even as a therapist who talks a lot about self-care with others. Sometimes I think it can be hard, but some of the things that I have found over the years that are good for me is I love taking my dog for a walk, spending time outside playing with my dog. He's very energetic, little Oliver. And I think I don't know, for me, it helps kind of clear my head, helps me focus on something else and being outside. And again, just going for a walk or spending time with friends. I like football, and it's football season. So Sundays are football day in my house. Yes. And I happen to be a Bills fan, so full disclosure. So go Bills. And I take a lot of ribbing from family and friends that I'm not a Patriots fan, but please don't hate me because of that. But yeah, spending time with friends, getting outside, hanging out with the dog, and I do like to read, but that's something that I tend to have a hard time making time for, with everything. But so just a few things I think that I know are good for me.
Yeah, and I was excited to hear Oliver mentioned. Of course, he's big fan of the show as well.
Number one listener.
Oh yeah, big friend of the show as well, just to mention. But I'm not sure the podcast is quite ready for me to discuss my allegiance in football, so we're just going to leave that for another time. But yeah, I appreciate what you mentioned too about how sometimes it's hard to engage in self-care, and I think that's definitely true. And in my experience as a therapist, when talking to folks about self-care, it's common for people to say, well, I don't have time for that, or, I'm too stressed out, there's too much to do, I don't have time for that this week. And so often what I see is a pattern of people disengaging in self-care when it's most important. And what I see here at Johnson & Wales often with students is when finals come around or midterms, it's when they stop doing their self-care. And I know it might sound just so basic to talk about and be like, oh, of course do self-care when things are hard, but oftentimes I see people, disengage when stress is at their highest.
Yeah, For sure. For sure.
Yeah. So I just wanted to start with that self-care bit, and then just to kind of jump back into what we were talking about before in terms of what the experience is like at counseling services. One of the first things I talk to students about when they come into my office for a session is confidentiality. It's an important piece of what we do because we want students to feel comfortable talking to us and not be worried about where that information is going to go or who's going to find out they're meeting with us or, what they're talking about and all that. So just to review quickly, what we do at counseling services is confidential. All right, Stephanie? And perhaps you can talk a bit more about how that looks and maybe some limits.
Sure. So I think first and foremost, right, our services are voluntary, right? So you have to want to come in. Nobody's going to force you to come in and see anybody in counseling services. But when you do come in, the fact that you're coming in to see us and anything that you may say to us is confidential. So nobody's going to know you're coming into counseling services unless you tell them or you want them to know. Your records with us are separate from all of your academic records. So faculty, they don't have access to anything that counseling services has access to in terms of our electronic medical record or appointments or anything like that. And if somebody were to call us and say whether it's a parent or a family member or a professor, is so-and-so coming in to see you, we can't confirm or deny that we know anybody, right? So we take confidentiality very seriously. So we protect people's personal information, right? And we talk about this when students come in, like you said, Joe, and we review what confidentiality means, right? And so students come in to see us for a variety of issues related to their mental health. And sometimes, students are coming in also because they're struggling with substance use, right? So maybe drugs and alcohol. And I think sometimes students might be worried, oh, well, if I go in and I say that I'm drinking or I'm smoking marijuana or I'm using some kind of substance, I'm going to get in trouble. That's not the case, right? So if you come in and you say that to us, that stays with us. We don't tell anybody. We don't share that information with other offices on campus, right? So confidentiality is really important because it allows people to come in and share what's going on with them and to be vulnerable and be open and be able to trust that we're going to hold that information, right? And there are some limits, right? So the limits are essentially that if somebody is a threat to themselves or someone else and it's a credible threat, then we have a responsibility to make sure that that person is safe, right? So that would be an instance where we would be able to and should break confidentiality if we were to need to in order to keep somebody safe. If somebody, comes in and reports any kind of like child abuse or elder abuse, right, that is currently going on, we are mandated reporters, so we are obligated to report that information. What I would say, and I say this to the students that I see, is that if there's ever a concern, if I'm working with a student and there's ever a concern about their safety or what they're telling me in terms of maybe threat to self or others or some kind of, disclosing some kind of abuse of an underage child, maybe back at home, I'm going to be open with that student and say, hey, I'm concerned about what you're sharing with me. Let's talk a little bit more about that. And I'm going to tell you if I feel like that's something that needs to go beyond just you and I, right? And so I want students to really understand that how seriously we take that, and that if you ever, were working with a counselor and before you disclose something, if you're curious about, again, what are the limits of confidentiality, ask us and we'll walk you through it. That has happened a number of times in my tenure here at the university, where students maybe want to double check what the limitations are before they share something. But then they end up sharing it and they feel better. And I think that helps them trust us, right? Like when we explain to them, we're going to keep your information safe. here are the instances where we may feel like we have to share information in order to protect you. And we're going to talk through that with you. And so there are no secrets coming from us, right? There are also times where students maybe want us to talk to somebody, right? Like maybe they want us to talk to a family member or a previous therapist or somebody. Then they can sign a release of information. So there's a whole legal document that we would review with you, and you would sign and give us permission, and you can limit what we can share. You can also revoke it at any time, right? And you have control over that, right? Like that's your personal decision. That's not a decision we're going to make for you. Am I missing anything?
No, I think that sounds all about right. And I especially like the part about asking us questions, because I always invite students to ask any questions if there's confusion about confidentiality. And just highlighting the substance use stuff as well, I think is crucial, because yeah, I've had a lot of students come in, Stephanie, who, may have challenges with alcohol use or marijuana or whatever it is, and they might initially be a little hesitant, as if, I'm going to do something about it, or I'm going to, stop the session and call campus safety and security immediately and be like, oh my goodness, there's an underage drinking person here in my office. But that is just not the case. It's not going to happen. I want students to feel really comfortable in sharing any of those challenges with us. And speaking of substance use, also, we didn't really talk a lot about it last time. We used the words mental health a bunch, but at least in my perspective, mental health and substance use, it's all connected, all integrated. And so if you feel as though, as a student, that you have a challenge related to weed or marijuana or alcohol, whatever it is, and you want to talk with us about it too, we're there for that as well. If you feel like you're, smoking to the point of not being able to focus in class, or it's causing a disruption in your life, that's something we can be helpful with too. And also it's something, actually, in a future podcast, I plan to have a whole episode just focused in on substance use and whatnot. So not to talk about it too much here, but it's certainly something we can be supportive with as well.
Yeah, I think that there are, times when students, or even just as individuals, you may be afraid to say something because you're afraid of what the reaction might be from the other person. Our role is to be supportive, right? And not judgmental, not, disciplinarians, right? Like in terms of telling you that, this is wrong, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. It's really about, listening to what's happening in your life, right? And trying to support you with it, and trying to help you make changes in things that you want to make changes in, right? And so I think, we see ourselves as partners with the student in working with them, and not, we're not telling them what to do or not to do. We are working alongside them to help them deal with something that's troubling them.
Right. No, certainly. And just one other area, too, that I wanted to talk about, which is a bit more abstract, I suppose, but one hesitation I've seen with students coming in, or just people coming in for therapy, is that going to see a therapist is not some sort of admission of fault. It's not saying that I am a bad person, or I did something wrong, or I am the problem, because oftentimes, especially in like interpersonal challenges, someone might say, well, why do I need to see a therapist? My boyfriend's doing this, or why do I need to see a therapist? My mom's treating me this way. She needs to do something differently. Seeing a therapist is just helpful in those instances, just because we might be an agent of change doesn't mean we're at fault. Have you experienced that before, Stephanie? That's something I've seen a lot in therapy, where people feel as though if, in an interaction, that they aren't at fault, or they're not the problem, so they don't need to engage in change.
Yeah, like that statement, I'm not the one who needs help here, right?
Right, yeah, exactly, yeah.
And you know what? And there are certainly instances where maybe you have some interpersonal struggle with somebody, and maybe that other person, whether it's a parent or a friend or a loved one, or just an acquaintance, maybe they could benefit from their own support and interventions. But, I think there are often times where there's always the opportunity to kind of look at ourselves in those interactions. And even if it's just getting support of, how do I manage this? I don't feel like I'm being treated well by this person, and it's bothering me, right? And that doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong or that there's something wrong with you, right? But it's just, this is bothering me. This doesn't feel good, and I'm not sure what to do with it, but I still have to engage with this person. So how do I cope with that? What are some strategies that I can use to set boundaries with that person so their actions, whether they change them or not, don't negatively impact me, right? And so again, people come to therapy for a lot of different reasons. And one thing that I've heard a lot from students in my time here at the university is that they feel like their problems aren't bad enough or big enough, that somebody else has it worse than they do. And so they don't want to come in because they feel like they're going to be taking time away from somebody else who really needs it. And whenever I hear that, I always like to challenge that, right? Because I think sometimes, our perspective of, well, what is bad enough, or what is, what's the limit? I don't think there is. It's not about who has the worst problem, right? If there's something that is bothering us or that we're struggling with, it's all relative, to ourselves and our own experience. So, it feels like a corny saying, but I think what we say a lot is that there's no problem too big or too small. That if there's something that isn't feeling good in your life or something that is bothering you, come in and get some support for it. That's what we're here for, right? And asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It's actually the exact opposite. I think it's a sign of strength, and I think you could ask anybody in our office, and they'd probably give you a similar answer, that it's a sign of strength, and it takes courage, and it's a good thing to be able to reach out and ask for support when we need it.
Yeah, certainly, and I think those are some great points there, Stephanie, and some good things to end on here as we're almost coming to the end of our second part of this exciting two-parter. And I really appreciate as well the no problems too big or too small. I think that might be from Paw Patrol, so I think we're in good company with that saying.
I think they got that from me, Joe.
Oh, fair enough. That's possible. I am rather familiar with Paw Patrol, but and I just as much of this podcast will be, my closing point here is, we want people to come in. Don't question it. Don't hesitate. Our goal at Counseling Services is to support people in any way we can. And that starts with coming in the door. And we're all therapists that we got into this role because we love talking to people. So don't hesitate to come in. We want to see you. And with that, I think we might be ready to close out this second part. Stephanie, do you have any final comments for your initial time on our podcast?
No, just thanks for having me again, and thank you for doing this, Joe. I think this is something exciting for our office and another way to try to reach students, and hopefully, you as students and members of our community, whether it's faculty, staff, or, parents, families, whoever may be hearing this, hopefully it's a different way for you to hear from us and to connect with us and get to know us a little bit, and just another way to hear the message that it's okay to reach out for support, right? And we want to reduce whatever stigma is out there related to, mental health and substance abuse or substance use, I should say. And just, we have these services for a reason. Come in and talk with us if there's anything we can do to help you. We want you. Yeah. We're here because of you and for you. And we care very deeply about our students, and we want you to do well here as Wildcats and beyond. And so, let us be part of that path if you need it.
Well, thanks again, Stephanie, and thank you all for listening. And this is just a start, so we will be back. Goodbye.